You paint, a lot of pesticides on the golf course. I noticed my equilibrium was off. I noticed that I couldn't breathe at times. I was developing skin rashes all over my body. I had glands popping out all over my body.
This is pretty serious stuff.
Very serious. High fevers. I was in and out of bed. I was frequently calling in sick. It got to the place where I could no longer function. And then I came down with what I thought was the flu. And after 4 days, I knew, deep within my heart, it wasn't my typical flu that I had suffered with before.
You had a pretty sickly background, as I understand.
Yeah. All my life, I remember coming down with strep throat. I had mono in college. I had Epstein-Barr. I didn't know at that time it was allergic in origin, so I was frequently on antibiotics.
Now, I'm wondering, I see here that your mother was a Holocaust survivor. I'm just wondering if the fear that she went through, it being in that whole environment, didn't almost pass through to you.
I believe it did. And my mother also battled a lot of physical challenges. At the age of 40, she developed rheumatoid arthritis. So, yeah, I do believe.
But this thing that hit you at age 28, it was different than anything you had before. What did the doctors say?
The doctors had no answer. I went to several top doctors in South Florida, and there was no getting around it. I was sick. I had high fevers, I had swollen glands, I had rashes, I had shortness of breath, but nobody knew what was going on. And it wasn't until I got down to University of Miami at their Center of Immunology was I diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome. And it was at that point that I became completely disabled, where I had to move back home with my father. He had to attend to all my physical needs. I was no longer driving. He was obviously preparing all my meals. I was in bed all day. And then...
That's awful.
Awful.
Rebecca, a young girl, everything to look forward to, everything going good in life, and now you're a sickly prisoner.
It was a nightmare. Sid, it was an absolute nightmare because I loved life. I was very active. And I went from being very active to being completely disabled. And my father, like I just said, had to take care of everything for me. And he would take me from doctor to doctor to doctor, and nobody had a good report. And then I ended up becoming so chemically sensitive that I could no longer live in my father's house because of a pool that was in the patio area. The chlorine fumes would just intensify my symptoms. And then obviously in South Florida, they do a lot of aerial spraying for mosquitoes.
Right.
And pesticide spraying for the landscaping. And it wasn't long that I couldn't stay there. So I ended up going to Dallas. And then from Dallas, a doctor suggested that Arizona would be the answer for me. And if I just got to dry air and I isolated myself in a safe house, that my body had the chance of bouncing back or detoxifying.
Now, what do you mean by a safe house?
A house that was built chemically free from the foundation to the roof line.
So did you have hope?
I had hope. I was really excited. I wanted to live. I wanted to go back to selling real estate. And it was in Dallas that I was told about a house that was environmentally safe in Arizona. So I had lots of hope. But
Now, is your father going with you from place to place?
My father, I couldn't travel alone. He took me from South Florida to Dallas, and then from Dallas, he took me to Arizona. And once I got to Arizona, I knew that it wasn't about the air I was breathing, it wasn't about the food I was eating, because here I was in this clean environment, and I was not getting any better. So I became very suicidal.
Tell me, in your worst experience, what you were allergic to and what was going on in your life.
I couldn't eat. That's when I began to really get scared. My body
I would think so.
Yeah, my body was wasting away. Everything just went right through me. And then when I would eat a food that I was allergic to, my throat would close up. And I would lose breath in my lungs. And it got down to the point where I was only able to eat 3 foods. And I would have to rotate them every 2 or 3 days.
What else were you allergic to?
Water.
Water?
Water.
You can't live without water.
True. I was able to drink, on occasion, distilled water. But if I would shower or brush my teeth in water that wasn't purified, my skin would burn and peel. Again, the shortness of breath, the swollen glands. I would become so fatigued, I could hardly walk out of the bathroom. So I need full-time attendance and care.
What would, how about material?
Material, cotton, paper. I had to wear gloves when I touched paper.
What would happen if you really touched the paper?
My skin would burn and peel, and I would develop blisters, and immediately it would hit
Just
my
by
lungs.
touching a
just by
piece of
touching
paper.
And it would hit my lungs where I couldn't breathe. I really couldn't breathe, and my throat would close up. And I developed, as time went on, excruciating headaches. So if I exposed myself to a chemical that I was allergic to or sensitive to, it would hit my head, then my lungs, and then before long I would be in a horizontal state. I could hardly stand up.
Did you have any hope from the doctors?
No, the doctors were trying their best. I was diagnosed with environmental illness in addition to chronic fatigue. And there is a clinic, like I said, in Dallas, who was hoping that once I got out west in dry air, in this safe environment, that my body would kick into its detoxification mechanism and I could come back to receive some sort of traditional medical treatment. But that never happened. My body never detoxified options. We went to the best. My dad took me from doctor to doctor to doctor, and there were no more doctors. I mean, I researched this disease until there was no more information to get. And on that day, I could no longer eat. I couldn't put organic cotton on my skin. My throat began to close up. Even when I would just walk outside this house in the middle of nowhere, there was nothing to react to. There wasn't any car fumes. There weren't any gas stations. There was nothing. There was no pesticide. And something on that day snapped. And I said, I can't do this anymore. I cannot live completely confined to this house. And I was about to take my life.
What stopped that?
I received a phone call from this woman who was now in Connecticut. The woman, if you remember, would send me
Right.
postcards and Bibles and tracts. And at that point, I wasn't even touching paper or plastic. And when she called, my father was so desperate. He knew that I was really seriously contemplating taking my life, and there was nothing that he could do for me anymore. So he was actually begging me to talk to this woman, where for months he didn't want me having anything to do with this woman because she was talking about Jesus. And coming from a Jewish home, obviously my father is a Jewish man, he wasn't open to his daughter accepting Jesus. So on that day, when he knew his daughter was completely suicidal and there was no hope and we were running out of money, he said, will you just talk to this girl? Will you just, maybe she's got something to say. And it was on that day in Cornville, Arizona, my life changed. And I listened, but I didn't listen holding the phone. I had to put her on the speaker because I couldn't even touch
course.
plastic.
And so you said a prayer with her and were you healed?
No, I wasn't healed. Actually, while I was saying the prayer, I didn't understand what I was doing. I was desperate. She said, will you just say what I'm saying? I guarantee it'll help you. What do you have to lose? If it doesn't help you, you're going to
Sure.
you're going to be in the same boat you are right now. We just give it a shot. And I said, you know what? My options are pretty bleak. I'm going to give this thing a shot because I wanted to live.
So what happened next?
Within days, supernaturally, out of the blue, I started hearing about others who had received a supernatural touch by Jesus Christ. I had never heard of another testimony of the power of God or God healing through, his son. And out of the blue, 3 other testimonies crossed my path. And it was awesome. It was just awesome.
Now, but I have here that you flew to Jacksonville, Florida. How were you able to do that?
It was very,
And
very challenging.
why did you do that?
Well, from Arizona, there was one last doctor that my father was on a mission to get me to, and that was in Santa Fe, New Mexico. So we ended up in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and there was just, the doctor said you're going to have to go to Taos, New Mexico, which was 8,000 feet above sea level in a community which had porcelain trailers. And there was no more running. There was no more going to a different community. So at that stage, my father knew. It was just a matter of days, and through these connections, a pastor had called our little condominium in Santa Fe, New Mexico, hearing about a Jewish girl who was suicidal. And he invited me to their ministry in Jacksonville, Florida. And his invitation said, just get here. If you can just get here, we know we have the answer for you. And they would talk about the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God of the story of Ruth, the God of the story of Esther. And I was able to relate.
Again, you have nothing to lose. However, how were you able to fly on this plane?
My father, packed up my belongings. At first, he was ready to disown me. He thought for sure I had a nervous breakdown. He thought I was losing my mind. He said, how could you go and turn your back on your Jewish roots by following these Christians? They're in a cult. He said, don't go. He was pleading with me with tears running down his face. Don't go. He was begging me not to board that plane. but I had to get there. Something told me that if I didn't leave Santa Fe, New Mexico on that day, I wasn't going to live to see the following day. And he took me to Albuquerque, New Mexico, and we boarded a plane. I was wearing an oxygen mask all the way down to the airport. I was wearing a cotton organic mask on the plane, and I spoke in this unknown language that I had never heard before, and they would explain that one day I would be filled with this language, and they just never gave up on me. They would brush my hair, they would bathe me, they would feed me, they would clothe me and pray for me.
You were that weak?
I was that weak. I couldn't even get out of the bed.
But then one night something happened.
One night, after these strangers had been on a fast for several days, I had a supernatural visitation, and I was filled with this unknown language, and my skin began to burn, but it wasn't a burning that I had experienced back in Arizona. It was a tangible heat that I felt from head to toe, and I began to shake alone in this room. And that's when the Lord began to speak to me, that indeed He was the Son of God, the Jewish Messiah. And that's when out of my spirit flowed this unknown language, and that's when I knew that I was at the right place at the right time, and my life was never to be the same.
Well, you then left that house, not completely healed, but a lot better.
A lot better.
And you went to Orlando, Florida, and you went to a meeting with a man by the name of Benny Hinn. Describe that meeting.
Well, I had never been to a church before. Remember, I grew up in the synagogue, and in this atmosphere in Jacksonville, it was a home environment. Church was the living room. So being in a congregation as large as Pastor Benny's service can be at times, it was overwhelming, and I thought, oh no, what am I doing here? There was an organ, there were Bibles on the floor, and growing up in a Jewish home, I didn't know from this environment. And in that service, I received another touch from heaven where the Lord visited me in a mighty, mighty way. And
He actually had a word about you. Explain that.
Well, Pastor Benny came out on the platform, and he started speaking about a woman who had symptoms that I was experiencing. And I thought, I had never heard of the word of knowledge. I had never heard of God speaking through a man in that capacity. I just knew that I had to get to this building, and I believed that God would heal me. But it was during that word of knowledge that heat hit my body, shaking hit my body. I fell almost to the floor. I was with a woman who actually caught me, and she helped get me to the platform. And it was on that platform in Orlando, Florida, that the Lord completed my healing. And Pastor Benny prayed for me, and when I rose up from the floor after receiving a mighty touch by the power of God, there was no more environmental illness. There was no more chemical sensitivity. There was no more electromagnetic sensitivity. I haven't shared that yet, but I became so allergic to electricity where I couldn't be around heat or air conditioner or a ceiling fan. And it was coming up from that floor that I was able to go back to living life as I once knew it.
Now, you look good today. What is going on inside of Rebecca as far as being allergic to chemicals or anything else?
I have no allergies. I have zero chemical sensitivity.